Hello and welcome to this Yin Yoga practice with 2 blocks. I'm Devi Daly and I'm really looking forward to sharing this with you because blocks are my absolute favorite prop, and usually 2 of them, not just 1, for doing Yin Yoga. It helps us to get into the better back bends, the more satisfying back bends. It helps us to go deeper with some of our lunging poses, dragon poses, and we're going to be exploring some of the other great ways to use blocks. So if you're here, you probably have some blocks. Let's go ahead and get them out and get started sitting in Seiza pose, maybe with one of those blocks or even 2 of them underneath your seat. So I'm going to use 1 block under my hips in Seiza at the middle height. You can find the height that works best for you. And let's take 1 minute to sit and close the eyes and arrive here. Arriving in your body, arriving on your mat. Welcoming your breath. And with the breath, bringing some love into this body, into this heart. Feeling the breath expanding the heart space. Expanding the ribs. And now coming off of your block, letting the eyes flutter open and beginning in with our first asana, beginning in supported bridge pose, also sometimes called the Golden Gate pose, with the block at the middle height under the hips, or you could play around with different heights or even 2 blocks under your hips at the low height, taking 3 minutes here to arrive in this back bend, beginning to feel into the hip flexors, beginning to feel into the sacrum, the tailbone, the lower back. Letting the breath carry you a little bit deeper into your experience here. Knowing that you can have your feet as wide or narrow as feels good here. And it might feel more intense if you go narrower. It might feel a little less intense if you go wider. Enjoying this energy moving, swirling inside of your body, and especially around where you're feeling this pose, the hips, the lower back, wherever it is. Sacrum, tailbone. And bending the knees to place your feet flat. Let's take this block out and settle the hips down onto the ground. Bring the soles of your feet together now and open the knees wide. Rest the hands on the body, one hand on the belly, one hand on the heart. And we'll take a 1 minute rest here. If you want to use your blocks under your outside of your calves or knees, go for it. Breathing into the belly and into the heart. And now drawing the knees toward one another and hug both knees into your chest. Feeling the lower back bending the opposite way now after that bridge, supported bridge pose. Inhale the breath. And as you exhale, roll to one side and come up to hands and knees with your blocks near your hands for dragon pose. Dragon pose with a block under each hand. Right leg is forward. And we'll do a 1.5 minutes with this version where we have both hands on the inside of the foot or rest down on the elbows on top of the blocks. And then we'll do another version, another variation for the second 1.5 minutes so that we hold for 3 minutes on each side. So in this version, you could have your blocks out to the side even if they need to go off your mat. And you could walk this foot out to the side too, or you could let this knee open out to the side. So play around with the amount of distance between these blocks that the arms are resting on and this front foot. And one of the things blocks are really good for is people who have wrist issues, which includes me, that if you don't like having blocks directly, if you don't like having your hands directly on the floor like this, you could still be at about the same angle with the blocks under your elbows at the middle or the high height. And now for our second block supported variation of dragon, taking 1 or 2 blocks underneath your thigh. And I like this support pretty much right in front of my sitting bone, but some people like it a little farther forward under the meaty part of the thigh, and others like it under the bone. Now, for me, I'm pretty short, and so I just use 1, but that might not be enough support for you. And lifting up 1.5 minutes here. This way you can really get the back bend, because dragon pose, when we lift up like this, is really an asymmetrical back bend. And we can also play around with squaring the hips. You've got a second block here, perhaps, that you could use under your left hand to play around with how much you are or are not squaring your hips. Or if you're like me and you have several sets of blocks, then I wouldn't call you crazy if you wanted to have 3 or even 4 blocks in your practice. I've been known to do it. And option here is to begin inching this front foot forward. Let it start to look like a split, dragon split. Maybe you could move your block down. Certainly not for everyone. And one last way to feel into this is to free up the arms, clasp the hands behind the back, maybe take a little back bend, or even reach the arms up over the head. All right, good. Let's release it down. And now come into, with blocks under the hands, a half split pose. So get the knee that's in the back under you in a supportive way and lean forward. Maybe you don't even need these blocks. This is going to be our hamstring stretch. A couple of minutes on each side. And see where these blocks and hands want to be. Maybe farther forward or maybe more directly under you. Or if you have a lot of forward bend in your hips that lets you rest down on your elbows on the blocks, go for it. And you could consider just letting your spine round, let your torso soften, let your head relax. No need to try to be straight here, but if you straighten and it feels good, you could go there. It's probably going to give you a little stronger hamstring stretch. But if you want that hamstrings and maybe stretching into the spine as well, softening might feel good. Or you could do a little bit of both, which is kind of what's feeling good in my body today. A little bit of lengthening the spine and then softening back down. Always padding your back knee is important here if you have any discomfort. I'm on a carpeted floor, so if I wasn't, I would have a folded blanket under my back knee. And sometimes I forget to mention that to you all because I'm on a carpet. So no need to be in any discomfort with your back knee. And slowly releasing this half split and coming forward into the lunge for a moment, lift up the chest. And we're going to step it back into downward dog with the blocks coming flat for the hands to be on top of for our downward dog. And walk your legs in downward dog, pressing one heel down and then the other. I love doing downward dog with my blocks because it just brings the weight more back into the legs, gives a better leg stretch, and a more sustainable upper body strengthening so that I can hang out in the pose longer. What do you think? Let's take it to the other side, left leg forward, and taking both blocks on the inside of the foot at whichever height works for you as you come down on the elbows. Or perhaps you like staying more upright and getting this nice hang of the hips. And what do the legs want to do? What does the front leg want to do? Does the foot want to step out to the side? Does the knee want to step out? Or do you like the feeling of keeping things more in toward the midline? And slowly coming back up, taking it into that supported bridge version with 1 or 2 blocks under your thigh. Remembering that you don't have to go with the 1 block. I'm a small person. Sometimes people don't realize that in this video. You don't see me standing next to other people, but I'm 5'2.5". Little person. And again, maybe you're leaning your hips one way or the other. Maybe you're clasping your hands on your front leg. Maybe you like having the hands behind your back in some kind of a way. Feeling into this asymmetrical back bend. It's a really nice way to warm yourself up for back bends. One side at a time. And releasing to come into half split Ardha Hanumanasana, or when we get into the functional approach to yoga, we might just call this a variation of half butterfly. Remembering you have full reign over your body and the placement of your blocks. This mat is your kingdom. This body is your kingdom or your queendom. So feeling it out, we are primarily just stretching the hamstrings here, the back of the left thigh. Maybe if you want to get that back stretch and let your back round, then you're feeling it there too. Lower back, middle back, sacrum, spine. Or maybe that alternating, lifting, extending, and then softening back down. And if you're in the range of motion in your body that likes to do split type things, then that might feel good to you here to come into a front back split and just fold forward over the leg. Or you do some variation of it with a block or 2 under your sitting bone. Breathing and softening. Feeling inside. If your wrists get sore here, then blocks under the elbows, maybe more blocks than this if you need more height. like to think of blocks as a way to lift the ground up sometimes. Lift the ground up to where you want it in the moment. And slowly releasing. And once again, downward dog with blocks under the hands. Walk your legs out. Bend one knee at a time as you press the other heel down. You could maybe get the hips into a little bit of inward rotating. Each time you bend a knee, you could dip a hip in toward the midline. Same thing on the other side. All right, now let's please drop it down onto the knees. Come into child's pose where we will use these blocks for a little extra arm stretch. 1 minute here. Forearms on the blocks. And settling back. Noticing what you feel in your armpits. My head likes to stay more hovering here, but yours might like to rest on the ground if you have a little more range than I do in your shoulders. And now let's just add a little bit of a tricep stretch with the elbows on the blocks. So I slide my blocks back. I place the elbows on the blocks and then palms together, bringing the hands down the back. Or if you rather just have your palms down, one on top of the other on the back, that's fine too. Getting more into the triceps, armpits, side bodies. And releasing to come up for saddle pose, or one of the several variations I'm going to share with you for saddle pose. So variation number 1 is to sit directly on the heels. And this might be a strong stretch for you in your quads, then that might be enough. Or to come back onto your hands, back onto your elbows, or all the way onto your back. Other variations are to sit between the feet with the idea that we're just working to stretch the quads and hip flexors. So if it hurts your knees and that's mostly what you feel, then this is not a good variation for you. But if your knees don't hurt and it feels good and gets the pose where that gets the stretch where you want it, you could come back here or all the way onto your back. So those are our prop-free versions. But since we have the blocks today, and they are such a wonderful addition to this pose, then we can begin with option number 1, a block at the middle height under the hips, or 2 blocks on top of each other under the hips. And again, you don't have to go back at all. This might be enough to start getting into this target area, or maybe leaning back. But keep in mind, if you've lifted your hips up, you've got a longer way to go, and you might need some additional something under the hands, firm cushions or more blocks. If you're comfortable sitting on your feet or between your feet but not coming all the way to the ground, then this is how you can come into this pose. This is generally my variation, is a block at the middle height under the back and another one at the middle height under the head. Or play around with the heights. And lifting the head higher is going to make it less intense. 3 minutes, which we are already a little bit of our way into. And if you are not very familiar with saddle pose, I just quickly ran you through some of the variations, but I have a whole separate class about saddle pose that warms you up into it and then guides you through an exploration of all the different variations, all the different ways that you can add the glory of saddle pose into your life. Wherever you are, finding your breath. If you find yourself in a variation that you can't really soften into, that you're having trouble breathing easily in, then go back to one of the earlier variations that I suggested, where maybe your torso's more upright and you're not trying to go back so far. Or consider leaning back onto something higher than the blocks, such as the edge of a bed or the edge of a sofa. And you might, after being in the pose for a bit, want to take whatever's under your head down a notch, or even what's under your back. And there's no need to be very concerned about the knees here. Sometimes people's knees pop up and they think that that might be a problem. It's not a problem, although it might mean there's more pressure on the tops of your feet. So you can prop yourself up higher under your back if you have any discomfort under your feet, or of course put a blanket, a folded blanket, or some other kind of cushioning under the tops of your feet, because that's definitely a common issue in this pose, that we don't want to get in the way of this lengthening in the front body and the back bend that we can experience here once we're able to relax. Continuing to breathe steadily, smoothly, and softly. And releasing the pose, so carefully pushing yourself up if you're resting back on blocks. And making your way into a resting position on the back. Taking 1 minute to feel the rebound, to feel the effect of the pose. Maybe feeling some energy in your quads, in your psoas, in your hip flexors. Maybe more in the back of the body, the sacrum, the tailbone, lower back. Bend your knees, hug them into your chest, please. Gently rock side to side. Feeling the low back, the sacrum. If it feels good, you could circle your knees a little bit here, one way and then the other. And rolling to one side to come up for Dragonfly pose. So Dragonfly, your width of your legs might be here, it might be wider. Make sure it's not so much that it is not something you can relax into. And as we come forward, you might be someone who comes forward easily onto your elbows and doesn't need blocks, but if not, this can be an excellent addition to your Dragonfly pose, is blocks at some height or other, either under the elbows, like so, or arms folded like so with the forehead resting on the forearms. 3 minutes here. And the place that we feel this stretch might be the inner thighs, the inner groin muscles and fascia. Might be the lower back, the spine, the hamstrings. You can play around with the rotation of your legs. Some people's feet come more forward and others come farther back. I love yoga blocks. Did I say that already? I love them. And now slowly coming up out of your dragon pose, dragonfly pose, and taking it into a side bend over the right leg. I'm going to come into this with the blocks on either side of the calf or the knee, and about 1 minute on each side to rotate this left shoulder open and then come sideways and see where your elbow wants to rest. Is it on the block that's behind your leg or in front of your leg? And do you want to have a higher height or a lower height of your blocks? Play around with it. You may not need it. You might reach your foot easily or have your elbow on the floor. And our idea here is to lengthen into the left side of the torso, left waist, left ribs. Maybe this left hand enjoys the feeling of being behind the back, or maybe it enjoys the feeling of being up and over the head, or even holding the foot if that's your cup of tea. Or, hey, what about clasping hands behind the head? I love this variation. I know a lot of my students do, where we keep on opening up. So lots of different choices for the arms here. Take a few more breaths. And slowly bring it back up to the other side and side bend over your left leg. See where your blocks want to be. See where your arms want to be. And you can feel and maybe even breathe into this right side of the ribs, right side of the neck. Keeping the arm down might get into the neck a little more, whereas having the arm up over the head might get into the ribs more. And interestingly, upper body tension is something that I work with a lot in my practice, and I find that getting into the side bodies and ribs is really essential for easing that tension, even though it's not directly working with the neck and shoulders. A lot of it can come from the torso, from the ribs, and therefore we can get a lot of release in the upper body by softening the rib area. All right, slowly coming back up. Ooh, resting here at the center, let the torso upright. Just take a moment to feel side bodies, spine, neck. And now come onto your back, have your blocks within reach. Hug your knees into your chest. Lift your head up toward your knees, squeeze into a ball. You could wrap your arms tight around your legs. And release your head back down. Bring your feet to the floor. Take one block, or possibly two, under your hips at the middle height, or you can play around with higher or lower if you wish. And lift your legs up. So we're coming into an inversion with the, inverting with the legs overhead and then letting the legs fall. So we begin to stretch into the backs of the legs and the lower back. So this is a forward bend more than a shoulder stand. And you might play around with tilting your block a bit. See if you can if that helps your sacrum to be more comfortable by getting more of a flat edge against your sacrum. So this is where you could stay. You could pad your block with a blanket if you don't like the hardness of the block on your back. If you want to take it farther, you could lift your hips off the block, coming into a snail pose, maybe sending the legs farther over the head, maybe the toes come to the ground, maybe you reach your arms up, and that's feeling like a little much for me today, so I'm going to hang out with my hips on my block in this supported snail pose. And in the supported version, your arms could be down along your sides, or they could be up holding the backs of the calves or ankles, or perhaps the feet or the big toes, if that works for you. And I do a lot of variation in my own practice. One of the things I play around with here is crossing the legs, crossing at the knees or shins, and that can give quite a bit more intensity to the lower back and hamstrings in a way that sometimes feels like just what I need. Sometimes not. And you can do that, of course, without holding the feet, just the backs of the legs. Slowly releasing, both feet finding the ground. Slide the block out and come into final relaxation. Spreading out, sprawling out on the mat as you wish. Maybe with the arms and legs straight, or maybe again in that that reclined butterfly pose, perhaps with those blocks underneath your knees, underneath the outside of the shins or the knees. And after working deep into the pelvis, hips, thighs, quads, hamstrings, lower back, and the side bodies and the inner thighs. Oh my goodness, we have been all over the place. So now breathing, settling, and being here in this body with all of these sensations, with all of this awareness of energy moving around, coursing through. And taking your own transition back, you could stretch your legs out, stretch your arms up, take as much time as you need here on the floor to do any extra stretches or deep breaths that you need before you move on with the rest of your day. Thank you so much for joining me. I'll see you next time. Namaste.